A sigh of relief for Ukraine and the rest of Europe. A missing climbing team recovered. And Israel has its own Black Lives Matter moment. All of that coming up on today's Hot Zone.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, well, if you missed episode 144 about Chernobyl, the nuclear disaster, you should really go back and watch that one. And don't just listen to it, you got to watch it. If you're catching the podcast on iTunes or SoundCloud, why don't you head over to opslens.com and watch the show. You can also get it on YouTube if you want. You get a lot more out of it when you see what you've been missing. All right, we're getting a lot of new subscribers so far. And so for their sake, let me take a minute and explain my purpose for this podcast. There are lots of amazing stories from crisis areas around the world that don't make it into the lineup at most news outlets, simply because they're just too busy with celebrity gossip or sports or, worst of all, politics. For example, did you hear about the floods that happened in Siberia that killed 20 people this week? There wasn't much of anything about that in the news in the United States. And look, America is so divided, partially because the news spends so much time covering the divisions. Well, I want to fill you in on things that aren't divisive, stories that really are news, out of the ordinary events from around the world, and then we'll spend enough time on them to help you really understand what's happening and why. And when we come across people who are hurting because of war or disaster or whatever, I want to leverage the power of new technologies at our disposal to empower you to not just watch the crisis, but get involved and do something about it by reaching through the podcast to help the people that are being affected. All right, so last week I did a whole episode about the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, and in that I talked a lot about my novel called Meltdown, in which terrorists planned to blow up the reactor and create a new nuclear holocaust, much worse than the first one in 1986. By the way, if you haven't read any of my books, why not? All 9 of them are available for you on Amazon.com, or if you want to support the podcast, I'll send you copies of my books for free. Anyway, the novel I wrote about Chernobyl pointed out that the reactor was a huge security risk for all of Europe because the original sarcophagus, which was hastily built right over the top of it after it blew up, was crumbling. And there are millions of gallons of highly radioactive waste inside that reactor. And all it would have taken was a terrorist group to drive a car bomb into the reactor or shoot something at it that would have caused it to collapse. And it wouldn't have been all that hard to do. They could have made a whole lot of Europe uninhabitable. Well, we can all breathe a little bit easier now, and I'm glad to say the European community came together on something, actually helped to build a giant new sarcophagus to contain the reactor. It was under construction when I was there back in 2016, and now it's been finished and installed. The new video footage was released this week from inside the sarcophagus, the new one, which is essentially like a giant lead-lined aircraft hangar that was built next to the reactor and then rolled on rails over the old structure. The tour inside the completed building shows the old reactor inside, and that's pretty cool. And this is why you want to be watching the podcast right now, because I'm showing you the footage of the tour of the new superstructure.
EBRD, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, manages the funding on behalf of donors, and we are reaching the final stages of the project. So on the 25th of April this year, just nearly 33 years after the accident, the facility passed its final major 72-hour test, and over the next few weeks there will be the formal issuance of the taking over certificate, which will mark the completion of the project.
In other news, did you hear about the team of climbers that went missing on a remote mountainside in the Himalayas? This is up in Nepal and India on the border there. An international group of climbers that was led by a veteran British mountaineer named Martin Moran went missing on May 26 when they got caught in an avalanche. The team was comprised of 4 Britons, 2 Americans, an Australian, and an Indian, and they were attempting to scale a mountaintop called Nanda Devi East. It's a really difficult and dangerous climb. In June, their bodies were spotted from a helicopter, and on June 14th, 2 teams set out to try to find and recover those bodies. On Tuesday last week, 7 bodies were recovered, and a police spokesman said Wednesday the search for an 8th climber had been abandoned. Now, Vivek Kumar Pandey of the Indo-Tibetan Border Police said the search had been called off after 7 bodies were evacuated by helicopter from the mountain in northern India. The bodies were first spotted on June 3rd at a height of more than 16,400 feet. They saw them from a helicopter. The 7 bodies recovered were handed over to the local district administration for identification and collection of DNA samples. Now, they say it was possible that the 8th body was hidden in the deep snow and it just wasn't feasible at the present time to continue with that search. All right, let's move on to Israel. There are over 100,000 Ethiopians living in that country who claim Jewish heritage. That claim goes all the way back to Exodus, when it's said that some of Moses' sons led a group from the tribe of Dan to Africa. Now, there are still a small group of Ethiopian Jews in Africa today. I went to Ethiopia several years ago to report on the Ark of the Covenant, and the belief by some that it resides in the northern Ethiopian city of Aksum. And I have to tell you, it was one of the most interesting trips of my entire life. But many of those Ethiopians who made the move to Israel claim they're being discriminated against just because they're black. Those feelings really boiled over into violence this week after an 18-year-old Ethiopian youth was killed by an off-duty police officer. Ethiopian Jews took to the streets to protest, and they burned cars and blocked roads, and they actually injured 47 police officers who went to handle those riots. Now, there are a few small facts that need to be pointed out about this story. The man who was shot, his name was Solomon Teka, and he was reportedly part of a group of youths that were sitting around in a park, but they started throwing rocks at the cop who saw them loitering there and then I guess asked them to move along. Now, I love how the LA Times reported that the youths were unarmed, but then buried in their own story, they report that those youths were throwing rocks at the officer. So if they were throwing rocks, I don't think you could say they were unarmed. It makes sense to me. Now, look, there may very well be some systemic racism among the authorities in Israel. I don't know. But if you're throwing rocks at the police, you don't get to claim you were shot because you were black. You were shot because you were stupid. And that's not racism. I feel like this is something the media really has done a terrible job of pointing out during the whole Black Lives Matter protest in the United States over the last several years. If a young man gets shot by a cop and he was, for example, shooting at said cop when the incident occurred, then his race at that point is basically irrelevant. If you're attacking a police officer and he shoots you, you don't get to play the race card. In my experience, the vast, overwhelming majority of cases like that, which have sparked riots over the past 5 years, would fit into that category. Now, I've actually done quite a bit of reporting on that subject, so check this out.
We always try to use the least amount of force. It's good versus evil, right? If you want to go fight with the cops, that's your choice. But when I was growing up, you just don't do that.
What this last year has brought out is a political environment and a media environment that wants to believe that the police were wrong before any facts come out.
For being chopped off at the head right there for any mistake because of the spin that media's put on law enforcement.
The police crack down on these mostly peaceful protests.
The responsibility to follow the laws and respect and obey law enforcement is built into democracy at the front end. Now, obviously, we can undermine that by being bad cops, and nobody wants that. But the fact that the police have a legitimate right to go about their business and, root out crime and stop criminals and all that sort of stuff, that's where I really think some things are lost.
And I tell people, we didn't ask to come into your house. You call us to resolve the issue, and if someone breaks the law, we have to take them.
We've got to protect ourselves. So if this person decides they're going to resist to whatever level, especially if it involves a weapon, we've got to be able to deal with that and not hesitate.
It's going to be very difficult. You're going to be second guessing yourself. You're going to be thinking about what national leaders, what political leaders are going to be saying, even if you're justified within your policy and your guidelines for your agency.
I think that when you have police violence that terrorizes communities, that doesn't show the respect that you're supposed to have from protecting people in your authority, that can feel also terrorizing.
So it creates an environment for officers where sometimes they may hesitate, they may be afraid to do their job, they may be concerned that if they do what they should do, that they could be indicted.
I think that there's a real issue with administration backing up law enforcement officers, and I think that there's a very poor understanding by the public of the situational decision-making that law enforcement officers have to make.
City Council, they actually introduced a bill where they actually cursing at the police is not a crime. And seeing what's happened over Ferguson and all the different demonstration, a lot of people are second guessing that, is this what I really want to do for a career now?
I've made it very clear that I worked with the police and instructed them to do everything that they could to make sure that the protesters were able to exercise their right to free speech. We also gave those who wished to destroy space to do that as well.
But at the end of the day, it's a risky job.
We don't have an opportunity to FaceTime anybody on a call for service. It's get out of the car, go find out what happened, talk to people, engage them, get facts from them.
I have thousands of encounters with civilians where nobody was injured and there was no threat to anybody's safety because everybody complied, everybody was professional, and everybody was polite.
In 1988, I remember the guys who had 30 years on, getting ready to retire, telling us we'd hate to be starting now. Things have changed. It's all different, but I think I understand what they were saying now.
Hey, the cops pull you over, you don't have a right to say, well, that cop is not legitimate, I'm not going to stop today and take off. You do. You have to pull over and you have to obey lawful commands.
You know, after a while, cops are just going to say, I'm out, I'm done.
It's not worth having to try to explain yourself because people don't feel like they have the administration's backing, or they're concerned of what the press is going to do with it.
Unfortunately, media gets a hold of that stuff based on cell phones, based on social media, based on criminals that give the improper, wrong information to the media, and the media goes with it.
We are the face of the government, and 9 times out of 10, we're the only one-on-one interaction you're going to see.
And I can't tell you how many cops in casual conversation joking say, you know, what we ought to do is just take a couple of weeks off. You don't want us anymore? Let's take a couple of weeks off and go to the house and see how things work out for you. And I'm not here to be your parent. I'm here to enforce the laws of the state.
Police are more professional, better trained, better equipped, better informed than they've ever been. You know, the police forces we have out there in the community today are excellent, and the community should be proud to have them and trustful of them. But unfortunately, we have a lot in the political and the media and the activist movement that just want to condemn the police every chance they get.
All right, so again, there may be some, in fact, systemic racism that needs to be addressed in the United States, but rioting in the streets, burning and destroying the work of other men's hands is neither honorable nor effective at bringing change. It's stupid, it's cowardly, and it's really kind of ironic because it sort of proves the point that you're claiming is false. You don't make the assertion that you're not criminals by going out and performing criminal acts. All right, that's all I have for today, folks. Thanks for watching, and thanks for all your prayers as well, for well wishes for my mom as we navigate this cancer diagnosis out here in Reno, Nevada. I appreciate all of you who have sent messages of encouragement, and I hope you have a great 4th of July weekend. So I'm Chuck Holton. I'll see you back here tomorrow on The Hot Zone.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.